Hey there, friends. Thanks for tuning in to another exciting episode of An Artist's Way of Healing. I am your host, Jonathan Palmiotti. I am excited you're here. Today we have yet another exciting guest speaker who has graciously made time to be here today to inspire us on his artist journey and to tell his story on how the arts has inspired him to become who and where he is today. Today, I present to you Jason Weeder from Bayside, New York. Jason, please say hi to our listeners.
Hi, listeners.
Jason Weeder, licensed master of social work, has been a practicing mental health therapist for over 2 years. He often includes various art creative therapies into his work. His goal as a therapist is to always meet his clients where they are at, to be flexible, and to find any way in which he can help them in their goals. His future career goals are to work with artists from all creative mediums. In addition to his career as a therapist, Jason is also an actor. Jason, it's great to have you on the podcast, An Artist's Way of Healing. I hope you're doing well today. Jason, as a mental health clinician therapist, you mentioned to me that you are taking your own approach to helping your patients with their everyday struggles in their lives, and you are doing it in an artistic way. Do you mind giving us a little bit of a background of how and why you started studying to be a mental health clinician therapist, and what ways are you using your artistic background to help heal people?
First off, thank you for having me here. I really appreciate you inviting me on. So what inspired me to be a therapist is I have a lot of therapists in my family. Half of my family are either nurses, therapist, or social worker. From a very young age, I kind of had an idea this is one of the things I might want to be. My list was actor, judge, or psychiatrist.
Interesting three.
So when I was young and throughout growing up, I always tended to give advice. I was always the person people came to, with whether it's within my own family, just friends, people I did shows with. I just have long conversations with them. And as I got older, it kind of became more clear it was leaning towards therapy. I also did deviate from that path a little. I went back to grad school 4 years after I graduated college. I also didn't know in college, I also thought I studied economics and math as well. Eventually, I just realized I really want to help people. I'm very good at talking to people and helping people. And I just want to give back and be as there and make as much of a difference as I can to the world as possible. One of my core tenets is I believe that all of us have a big effect on the workings of the world, but we will never know the ways in which we do it. We can affect someone in the smallest way, and that leads to such a snowball effect in life and the world itself. So I just want to do my parts in it.
It's very interesting you actually say that, because I was just mentioning, and I actually usually mention this at some point in every single episode, if not at least most of the episodes. You never know what type of day someone's having, and you never know what you say is going to make that big of a difference. And if you answer them in a really negative way, it's going to do one thing. And then if you answer them in a very positive way, it's going to do another. Of course, we always want to think about resorting to the positive. If you answer someone in a negative way, it's going to be a negative downfall for them. If you answer someone in a positive way, that can actually legit be the thing that they need in order to get through the day. But some people have thoughts in their head that you have no idea exactly what they're going through, and they could be on the verge of a mental breakdown. So I kind of really resonate with you, and which is kind of like the whole idea of this podcast. I always like to say, be kind to people.
And what you did there is actually very interesting. That's one of the things I always, when clients come in, they'll say, these thoughts are so crazy. I feel so crazy. And I pause them because exactly what you just said, you don't know. They themselves don't always realize how they got to that place. It feels like this isn't me, this is crazy. But there's a very linear way of where they got these thoughts from. I'm going to use a very silly example, but hopefully it makes the point of kind of what I mean. Everything we think, there's always a reason we're thinking that. There's always a way we got to where we are. Sometimes it could be something silly, like I'll just bring up the classic Pavlov experiment. When they heard they salivated when they heard the bell. If you went to anybody and they started salivating when they were ringing a bell, that would look crazy. But if we said, oh, they were part of this experiment, if it was humans in the study, that would make sense. Exactly where we got there, what we know about classical conditioning. So sometimes thoughts start small. We don't always know where they come from. Like, it could be just something you heard once and then it's stuck in your head and all of a sudden it's there, and you wouldn't be, if we had a therapy session, you'd have no idea that that's where that came from. But there was a reason that this is in your head, and it did come from somewhere.
That's so interesting. So it's like literally like a cause and effect almost.
Everything is rational. There's nothing irrational. There's a reason that something sticks out in someone's mind, and it came from a place.
You said there's a cause and effect. So how does the cause and effect relate into a patient therapist scenario?
So if I'm understanding you right, you're kind of asking, how do we use the fact that nothing is fully irrational? How do we, what do we do with that in the therapeutic setting? Well, first off, and this is always one of the things you'll hear people say a lot, and it is one of the more true things if we look at social media therapy, which I don't like, but I have a whole spiel about that. Validation. They're validated. They don't think something crazy or weird or just happening to them, or, we can bring it to a place of there's a reason you're feeling what you're feeling. What you are feeling is valid. Our emotions are valid. If you are feeling something, you're feeling it. You can't just stop feeling it. And so getting to a place of validating what they're feeling is one of the first things you do in therapy. And then we explore, well, where is the feeling coming from? And then we start to unravel that chain. Where is this feeling coming from?
What does like a typical session look like?
So I hope this isn't the full answer. I hope this isn't the answer I will give for most of these questions, but it is one of the most therapist answers you'll ever get to a question, which is, it depends. I can tell you with my own practice, or what I do specifically, I always start in very similar places. Every therapist will start differently. Every therapist starts engaging with their clients differently after the intake. The intake's the only thing we all typically do. Well, some therapists don't do their own intakes, so that's not even true. I always start with a little bit of psychoeducation. I always start my therapy sessions when I have a new client talking about, first we treatment plan. We figure out why are you here? How do we know therapy's working? But then we get into, I start explaining what emotions are, what emotional expression means. And this isn't always the case, but a very common thing I do talk about is what good, effective communication can look like.
Yeah. So let's create a scenario, for example. I'm an artist. I'm coming to you as Jason, the licensed social worker. And I'm having a lot of struggles with my whole life back at home experience. Okay. How would you go ahead and start that conversation with that patient that they're saying that, art is the way that helps them heal? And then how would that, I guess, lead into an art creative therapy?
I probably want to know more about what's going on at home. But then I'd also want to find out how it's affecting you. I can give you some examples of some ways that I use art therapy. Because I know what you're trying to get at. I would have to know so much more to know what is going to work for you right there. So, for instance, one of the things I like doing, did you ever hear of the game One Word Story, the improv game?
I think so. Maybe.
We start off I go once.
Oh, yes. Once upon a time.
For people who struggle sometimes with rigid thinking, this is especially true with people with ASD, autism spectrum disorder. You don't know where that game's going to go. You don't know what the next person's going to say, so it's a very big collaborative game where you have to adjust some of the rigid thinking. That's an example of one creative therapy I might use. Another one is I've employed a little bit of drama therapy. So when people have I typically use it when someone has a very difficult time reaching into their emotions to emotionally express. For people who are very closed off from their emotions.
And I feel like a lot of people are. And it just, one more thing before you continue. It's interesting because a lot of people, and I don't know if this ties in as much, but there's a lot of people that there's a lot going on inside. And sometimes, or most of the time, a lot of people don't want to like admit that there's a fault on their own. They're going to push the fault on someone else. Am I getting hot somewhere?
When we get into that conversation, I start to go a little bit looking at our ego. And I don't mean this in a ego the way we use it in today's society. I use it more in a idea of like the Freudian way, which we have the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is our wants and needs. Our superego is basically our conscience. And our ego is our decision-making process. How do we get what we want by also adhering to our morals? And so I feel that people who don't always trust their own decision-making process, who don't always trust themselves to make the right decisions, who don't think as highly of themselves sometimes, they put on a big bravado. So that's more of the ego we think of in today's society, a bravado, where people act like, oh, I'm the best, I'm amazing. And so when you have a big bravado, a lot of the times your ego, what you actually think of yourself, is being like shielded by that bravado. So because it's so small, a little like you might be wrong, like a little piece of paper you throw at it, hurts a little bit more because of how tiny it is. So that's why we have the big bravado to cover it up, to be like, I'm not wrong. Nothing's going on.
That's so interesting. A lot of people, because especially in this day and age where like there's so much going on, there's so much tension in the world, where like every little thing, if you, whatever it is, accuse someone of doing something or saying something, there's so much defense mechanisms being pushed up, and nobody really wants to sit back and really just understand the situation and reflect. Because, and this also gets into healing in my sense, in regard to the mission of this podcast, because how are you ever going to heal if you don't identify the problem and take off the layers of that specific situation that you're having? How are you going to actually unfold and really just heal?
One of the things I try to stress sometimes in therapy, I take off my little therapist hat, I put it down, and sometimes I tell my clients that I just, from some personal tenets, is that I believe that one of the strongest things we can do is just learn from our mistakes, be open to making the mistakes, and being open enough to learn from them. If you're talking about it in a societal construct, people are so afraid to say something they think someone won't like, because they think then they'll tell other people and that will spread, and they'll have this mark on them. Or that they'll say something that's not who they feel they are. I feel I'm a very, they might feel I'm a very empathetic person, I do everything right, and then they are so afraid to admit that they didn't do something that adheres to their morals. The best thing you can do in that situation is just be a little bit more open with it. Say, where did I go wrong? How can I fix this? And, then it goes into our own power of cognition, where you have to think about it too.
Let me ask you a question. So let's say someone continued to say, no, I'm right, you're wrong. What ends up happening in a clinical therapist point of view? What does that do to someone? Obviously, it doesn't heal them, but what does it do down the line?
So again, it depends. Basically, we have to find out why they're doing it. What about them? What is the reason for it? What other things are going on that's leading to this trait that might not be helpful for them? One of the core things in therapy, and I said this a little bit in the bio, we need to meet people where they're at. If they don't think there's a problem, I can't tell them there's a problem. That's not my job. I don't know their life. I could be wrong. I've not sat a day in their life. In the context of therapy, we believe the person is the expert in the room. They're their own expert on their life because they've lived it more than anyone else has. What we use sometimes is something called motivational interviewing. At its core, we're just kind of exploring, how is this hurting you? Well, why are you here? What is going on? I'm just going to give you a for instance example. Let's say that someone's not accepting other people are right, but they come in because they feel lonely, right? Again, this is just a one case for instance example. Okay, well, why, you're feeling lonely. Let's talk about that. We explore making friends. We explore different areas, why it's been difficult. They keep telling, keep getting into these arguments. Okay, so it sounds like these arguments are affecting your ability to make friends, right? We just keep pushing on, why are you here? What is your motivation to be here? And through that, we explore where they might need to reflect more in their own life about. And again, there are different ways of doing this. Something that could be good, maybe even, is a narrative therapy when I'm thinking about this. Again, I do want to involve some of the more creative aspects of what I do. Basically, you make almost a story. You're making a story. And this also gets away from the ego part a little bit that I was mentioning before, where you make a story. You're now a little bit removed from the situation. You're removed. There's that level of, we're not talking about me now. We're talking about someone else. We're talking about a character. We start giving them all these traits that are very similar. They start writing stories about it. And all of a sudden, they're able to maybe see a little bit of their own behavior through that third person lens. So now it's not them. It's this third person lens where they can see a little bit more clear. They're a little bit emotionally removed from it.
Oh, that's interesting. And then it's kind of like a mirror, almost like they see themselves in the mirror.
Yeah. In a way, exactly. We're now looking at it, and it's now not you even. You're not in the mirror. You're not the reflection in the mirror. It's someone else. It's the same character you've created.
I see. So you've created identical traits of a character relating to you. And it's not you, but it reminds you of you.
Yeah.
Ah, that's interesting. That's really helpful. And I can understand why that's a lot of the time that's like an aha moment for people.
It's also one of the beautiful things about movies and TV in and of itself, how that artistic lens and theater and all the other creative outlets, how we can look into something, see ourselves in it, that either validates it, that either helps us learn, that either comes from a place that really allows us to reflect on ourselves and the world around us. I'll talk just for a personal story if you want one. One of the movies I felt the most seen in ever is Everything Everywhere All at Once. I would highly recommend it. The character Waymond, I don't want to spoil too much, but spoiler alert for everyone. In the end, there's like a lot of violence going on. And Waymond kind of talks about how he looks so passive in life and not taking action, but in reality, he's using kindness as his weapon. He knows the effect kindness can have, and it's very calculated. It's very purposeful. It's not just like a haphazard, I'm doing nice things, something will happen. It is very meticulous. And I felt very seen because I felt like I do the same. I always think I take action, and people say, you're not really doing much. You're not really taking action. You're not doing anything. And in reality, no, I'm doing a lot. I'm doing it my way. I'm doing it in a way that speaks to me, and it's very purposeful.
Yeah, you have to do what's right for you, because it's for you. I mean, everybody's going to have different needs. So if you're going to do something to which it's not going to service you, but how are you going to actually make other people happy if you're not happy yourself? So Jason, you have been studying therapy for 2.5 years and 18 years acting. Through your experience with doing both simultaneously, have you learned or discovered anything new about yourself or others? Also, how have you been able to navigate your career by utilizing both backgrounds in the arts and therapy in an authentic way that speaks to not only you, but also provides effective ways to treat your patients?
I think almost all therapists will give the same answer. It's yes, you learn new things very often. And I think I alluded to this a little bit. Being able to learn and grow is one of the traits that I respect the most in life. And there's something we could learn from every day if we're looking hard enough. And so I think as a therapist, I'm seeing all new different people very often throughout the year, learning so much about their life. I'm learning a lot about the world. I'm learning a lot about people. I also then learn new therapeutic practices. So there's a lot that I will always learn and grow. And when it comes to me, I'm a part of the world. If I'm learning about the world, I'm learning a part of myself. You also learn some other things. You learn sometimes what your limits are. You learn sometimes what bothers you. You learn sometimes what you're judgmental about. And it's very important to acknowledge those things because we all have our faults. We all have things that aren't helpful for us that we do. So if I learn something that makes me a little uncomfortable during session, it's very rare. But if I learn something that makes me uncomfortable, I can really analyze it. Why does this make me uncomfortable? What's it telling me about me? And in terms of my art, I like diving into new characters. I like diving into where they are, what's their mental state, trying to understand things through this new lens. And I feel if you are an actor trying to understand these characters, wishing you could ask all these questions, it's something you could bring to as a therapist. The same way you're trying to understand the character you want to play. There's a lot you can, mix with both. The same way as a therapist, you'd ask something, all your questions to your client, you almost feel you could ask similar to the role you want to play. And so when you act, you also are very generous, or you should be, if you're an actor, very generous scene partner, being very involved, being able to go with the flow with your partner, especially if you do improv. You really need to be able to change what you're thinking on a moment's notice. You really need to be able to be in tune with what someone's doing on stage with you to make a better scene. And that's absolutely things you could bring into a therapeutic setting.
It's really great because you have the advantage of both sides of the world. And I can just imagine your givens for your character is that much stronger than some. Obviously, of course, I want to give credit to any actor that does the work to put it in, but you understand the character, not only its traits and what you know about the character, but on a psychological level, you're really digging into the character of what exactly is going through the mind of that individual that's going to have the cause and effect. Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm laughing because I did this. I was just doing a Shakespeare musical review, and I was playing Hamlet in it. And so I was talking to my director of the show, was also is a creative arts therapist, and so we were talking about what we would diagnose Hamlet with. We were trying to think of these mental health diagnoses, and it veered off, but it was just so funny because we were like, oh, maybe we could diagnose him with like a PTSD or borderline personality disorder. But part of it was, oh, well, we don't know what he was like before the trauma of his father dying. Maybe he was completely different. Maybe these things are only from that, in which case it wouldn't necessarily be the same diagnosis. And then at the same time, we're like, well, that's similar how we do with the clients. We don't know what they were like before they come into a session either. A month ago, they could have been a completely different person and something could have happened and we're not going to know it. So it's the similar struggles. Understanding Hamlet was the same I might actually face with the client. And it was very funny.
As a therapist, do you take inspiration from role models as well? How do you know what creative techniques you would like to use and why?
Role models are just looking through different therapeutic practices. I guess all the therapy practices you look at, that's, I guess, what your role models are, all the different lenses. I use a very eclectic approach personally, so there's a lot of different practices that I employ.
So in this case, it would be more so someone that has been a therapist in the past that you kind of look up to?
More of their ideas. I look up to the ideas. I don't really look up to any specific figure. Maybe I just don't know enough about them on their personal lives. But in terms of their ideas, I can respect them. I guess I could also just say all my clinical supervisors I've been very blessed to have fantastic clinical supervisors throughout my process as a therapist who are very generous and giving with their time. And they are people that I would like when I'm in a supervisory role later on to, whatever the right word is to mimic, to be like them. They're very giving with their time. They're very smart. They're very caring about the people they're supervising. You don't always get supervisors like that, because I've heard horror stories from people that I've been with that they don't care. They don't make a lot of time. They're just like, figure it out on your own. And I somehow have been blessed with some of the greatest supervisors of any of the people I know who are therapists.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, I think that's great for any environment, healthy environment that you want to be in. I mean, you went to school for this and like you chose this career for a reason. I mean, honestly, you had a million things to choose from and you chose this. So obviously you're in this specific profession for a reason. And just to be around people that actually have the same interest as you and really just show that they genuinely care about the topic at hand, it makes it all the better. I totally get that. Jason, you mentioned to me that one of the ways that you feel successful in the arts, in a therapy sense, is that you make it a goal of yours to work almost exclusively with creatives. Could you please go into what you mean by that?
Creative types have their own mental health struggles that are sometimes more specific to mental health types, especially those who are in the arts and who have their career in the arts, I should say more. Because they're more creative types who their main career is not focused in the arts. And I would like to help those people. I think I understand some of their struggles more being in the community. My main career is not in the arts, but I do have a goal. I do have a goal of becoming an actor, which just to list two examples. One thing that's so common is that there's this view of needing to struggle for your art, needing to suffer. And I don't think that's true. And I think there have been clinical studies showing that doesn't have to be the case. And there are ways to get that same type of motivation that you get when you're struggling, and to be able to hone that don't require the struggle, that don't require putting yourself through hell and not getting help. There are ways of doing it. Addiction is something that runs high with artists and creative types. It doesn't have to be relied on like that. There are so many things that are related to creative types that don't have to be the way it is, that I want to help with. Someone who's thinks of these people as like minds, that I want to help.
I kind of think of like people that have struggled, especially within creative situations, is like to create a role, and then like they get too deep into the character. Like, for example, like Heath Ledger. I don't know. I can't think of anyone else at the top of my head, but I'm sure that there are so many other people. But yeah, people get lost in the art to the point where, they don't know how to get out of it. They don't know how to retract themselves back from what they put themselves into. So I really feel like therapy is a way to kind of start, at least, right?
And one of the important things, and this is not for everyone who's in a similar situation like that. This is just another in general thing that could be applied to a situation, could not, depending on the situation, which is people do not separate themselves from their art. And there's a separation. There's a lot of mimicry in it. But there is a separation. You are more than just your art. And it might not feel like it, but you are.
You are not your art.
And you are not your art. And there's also another thing, that people's outlets are their creative medium a lot of the time, right? And when your creative medium starts to become your job, that creates a lot of issue for that outlet. Because all of a sudden, and I think this is becoming a really more common, which there's also an annoyance to this in society, where we always think this is now more for anybody. Everyone thinks their hobbies and their creativity and their outlets need to be a side hustle. Sometimes it just serves as that outlet. It doesn't have to be. And it could be nice if it is, but it doesn't have to be. And I think a lot of times, if it can be monetized, they will. And then all of a sudden you're doing all this stuff for money, for work that's stressful, and there's nothing for you. There's nothing for you to just be you and not have to put all this attention and detail and stressing yourself out over with it. If you are an actor who paints, even if you're an actor who paints, it doesn't have to be now, I have to paint professionally. You could leave that as just you. And then if you do start painting professionally because you're really good at it, you could find a third thing. It's one of those things where, again, this isn't specific to anyone, and it's not the case for anyone in particular that we've talked about, but it could be one of those things where you just need to leave things for you sometimes. It doesn't belong to the world. It's not for anybody else. It is for you because that's what you need.
Now, I want to talk about the actor side of Jason. As an actor and someone whose roots lay deep within the arts, what does being an artist mean to you?
God, there's so many things that there's so much and nothing at the same time that being an actor means to me. I like being an actor because it is the place I feel the most comfortable. It is the place I feel the best. I have so much fun doing it, and I feel so confident doing it. I don't always feel that way in my regular life. So having a place where that feels good for me is important for me and my own personal, like, emotional and mental health. It's also giving, because we live so much of our life through media. We have so much of our life reflected to us, like I said earlier, through media. So being able to portray something that someone can enjoy and maybe also mean something is important to me. And also just being a part of this great community of artists, this great community of creative types. Again, I know I said I struggle feeling like I'm always part of it more than, others, which I do think is a common sentiment. But I think that being able to be around these people and feel that sense of community is something I love.
I like the word community, and this is not the first time that I've heard the word community. I've heard it in other episodes with other guest speakers. But the thing I want to touch upon in regards to what you just said in regards to community is a lot of our friends, especially those that are in the theater world, as I would know because I'm part of that experience in the community, those are where some of your best friends come out of.
I think community is one of the biggest things missing from our mental health and society right now. We have a lack of community on so many levels, and that gets us into the situations we get into today, and especially politically, because that's starting to become people's community, politics. People don't feel a sense of community in many areas of their lives. So much of our lives sometimes are online, and there's not always a good sense of community online. And seeing people in person adds that closer community, because there's more things you're learning about them from in person. What's the tone of their voice when they normally talk? Do they talk fast? Do they talk slow? What body language do I get off of them? Politics is where sort of, if you were to gather around at your local synagogue, let's say, because you have Judaism, I'm Jewish, as your sense of community. That's very strong. If you were to have any other religion, or, you go to a local, you're a fan of a local sports team, you have that sense of community. And if you were to go to games with certain people, that's a little bit of a community. You build there like a 7-line army type of thing for the Mets. People have taken politics to be that sense of community. And they don't want to lose that community because it's so important. So even if they would normally be a part of it, and then that starts to be the only people they do trust. If I'm in a community with Mets fans, I'm probably going to take their opinion a little bit more seriously about the Mets than someone outside who doesn't watch the Mets as often.
This makes 100% sense, because you're in an environment where people are like you and they want the same thing as you do. And it really kind of creates a more of a comfortable atmosphere.
Yeah. You feel close, you feel friendship. It's not just these people who have something in common, they're brethren, when you find community like that. And so I think that's very much missing. We've been very separated because of so many reasons. There's not just one reason. There's so many reasons we're separate. And every answer you're thinking in your head, a lot of them are, well, okay, not all of them, but a lot of them are probably valid if you're listening to this. But there's also more. And being able to find that sense of community is so important.
100%. You mentioned to me that you are a timid and anxious person in previous conversations, and that acting helps create a world where you start to feel okay again. What does your art do for you that makes you feel better about yourself? Does being a therapist also help with these uneasy feelings?
I am someone or a lot of people sometimes have to think a lot about situations. Is this right? Am I doing everything? I'm someone who is very thoughtful in the choices they make during their lives. I'm someone who's very thoughtful in the words I say, or I try to be. And I think when I'm on stage, I don't have to do that. It's kind of the opposite of how I necessarily am in my daily life. There's a lot of thought I'm putting into the character. There's a lot of thought I'm putting in beforehand. But when I am on stage, I am just expressing whatever the character is expressing. I am just that character. I no longer have to be so thoughtful in the words that I say because they're already written for me, baby. I just got to speak them with emotion and feel like I'm that character. At the same time, there's a lot of emotional expression that happens when you are on stage. And lastly, it's just fun. Like, I get to play all these other characters that aren't me. I get to be all these other people that I don't have to worry about, I don't have to worry about how they are, what they're like. I just get to be. I get to be. And that's so wonderful. In terms of therapy, it's helped. I mean, learning about mental health has helped. Mostly. You then sometimes worry, once you know more, you're worried, oh, am I this? Am I this? Am I this? And you're definitely not. Like, so many people, when they go through grad school in a mental health profession, will start to look at all these disorders and like, do I have that? Do I have that? Do I have that? And the answer is almost always no. Almost always. And so knowing more about the field, though, has allowed me to know more about myself and the way I operate, and has allowed me to be a better person in my own mental health.
Yeah. It's interesting. The things that you mentioned about how acting kind of helps in regards to who you are as a person, as Jason, is kind of similar to what I felt like when I first got on a stage for the first time. I was in high school. I remember it was Bye Bye Birdie. That was my first ever production. The point is that before the show, I was a very, very timid and shy person. I had no friends. I didn't know how to socially make friends. Before I started theater, I actually played piano. I've been playing since I was 11 years old. And, you know, a typical kid on the weekend would go out with their friends, go to get something to eat, or, you know, go watch a movie. What did I do? I stayed at home, did homework, and I played the piano. My point is that I really relate to what you're saying because acting really saves people and it heals people. Jason, do you ever feel like your art ever abandoned you, or that your art didn't do what it was supposed to do, or it wasn't the way you thought it would turn out? If so, how did that make you feel?
I don't feel my art has necessarily abandoned me, but to an extent, I've at times abandoned it. I'm not as proud of my art career as I would like to be. And I think that's okay. It's not about who I am as a performer, but it's about I have not done enough for it that I would personally be happy with. So there are times in my life where I've not been in shows because of work, because of grad school, and there are times where and those were important things, and I was okay with that, but there are times where I haven't really done enough for it when I've had the time. And I think it's really good that I personally can separate the fact that, like, I don't feel as good as an artist, not because of me, but or the art, but just because I could have done more. And I think going in the future, setting up goals for myself to do more of that. And in therapy, the first thing we do is we set goals for therapy. And one of the biggest things we talk about with clients is the goal has to be things within our control. We use the term SMART goals. It's an acronym. Specific, measurable, attainable, I think real is the R. I'm forgetting off the top of my head. You could look it up. And time sensitive. An example of this for me is maybe I audition for something once a week, right? Maybe if I feel like writing, I like to write poetry too. Sometimes I like writing things. I write something once a week. Setting a goal I can attain, that's measurable and specific, is the way I know I'm doing enough for my art career. And that's all I can control. I can't control how good my art is. Sometimes I can't control someone's going to hire me. I can't control if I'm going to be a big star. What I can control is the work I put into it. And if I do that, I feel I will be more proud of it and won't feel as sometimes distant from it.
Yeah. It happens a lot, and more often than we actually think, that the art, it almost feels like an abandonment because someone didn't get the role that they wanted, or they're constantly auditioning in their professional world of theater or music or whatever. And time after time after time, they're not getting the job there, and they're having to go back to that regular 9 to 5 that, they are content with, but they don't love it. They don't love what they do, or around the clock job. And ultimately, a lot of people feel a sense of abandonment, which is why I asked this question. We don't want to always feel like we're stuck. And stuck is why people get into different mental states. And I could probably just imagine, in your take of it as a therapist, and since you kind of spoke a little bit about this earlier, that people have to figure out how to get through that in a healthy way.
And sometimes it comes down to, like I'm saying with me, what I can control.
Yeah, and I think that also has to go about the idea of when someone is able to heal themselves. And someone actually said this, that you have to be the one that's going to go ahead and choose to want to heal yourself. You can sit in that corner and just basically think about what exactly made you feel like you were struggling, or what trauma that was. And you can constantly play and replay that, whatever that happened. But if you're not stepping forward and doing something about it, that's going to be in a way that's going to help heal, then you're not going from A to B to C, where C is healing. You're going from A to A to A, and then repeat.
Sometimes we do need more reflection, purposeful reflection. So I agree that there has to be a purpose of wanting to be motivated to move, right? We need motivation. We need to find it. I'm going to connect it to something where I think you'll get my gist. People love to use the term overthinking about things, right? I don't like using that term because it doesn't tell me anything about why you're thinking so much about something. Everything we do is with a purpose. Maybe what you're thinking about is important and you need an answer to it, right? Maybe the issue is you've been thinking about it the wrong way, right? Maybe you didn't have enough outside knowledge to get an answer. So then it's about finding that outside knowledge. You weren't overthinking. It's an important subject. Maybe you're doing an accurate amount of thought for how important it is. Maybe you were going about it in a little bit more of an incorrect way. There are other things we could have added or changed about the process, right? Sometimes we replay these things because there's a little bit of catharsis in it. So the option is now switching that catharsis to something else. But part of that is by examining what benefit you got from doing this. What is the benefit you're getting? Everything we do benefits us in some way, even if it's small. Even if we think, oh, there was no benefit to this. Why was I doing it? There was a small benefit you were getting in that moment. You just need to figure out what it is and replace it with an option that is more beneficial on a whole to you.
Okay, so like let's say you're healing and you want to try to get away from whatever it is, but are you saying that like you should always remember what happened because that is part of who you are?
I'll say there's no running away from things. Sometimes we need a little bit of distance.
Because you're saying reflect, right?
Uh-huh.
So when you reflect, you're reflecting on something that actually passed. So when you do that, it's not, and that experience, I'm assuming, is like a traumatic experience of whatever it is, struggle. But then when you're reflecting on it, you necessarily don't want it to just completely evaporate, go away.
That's called repression.
Right. But you want it to kind of just, you want to heal from it, but you'd never want to let it go because it's something it made you who you are today.
Not necessarily. That could be an aspect of it. It's more of we need to learn from the past. There's a lot to be learned from it. Learn from the past, have a goal in the future, and use the present to work towards that goal. We oftentimes need to stay in the present, but we can't completely ignore the past or the future because the past helps us learn, the future helps guide us. The present is where we need to do the work in. It's where most of our work is done.
Yeah, and that's what I guess that's what I meant, is like you don't want to be stuck in the past, but you want to remember the past so that it can propel you to the future. Yeah, that's what I was kind of trying to get at. It's kind of like, you had someone that you loved, they passed. They're in the past, and you were really distraught over it. But then 10 years down the line, if you're still stuck in the past because of their passing, you're not working towards the future, and you're not putting any work in the present to get to the future.
That's true. But then in the present, if let's say I had a client like that, again, I'm going to give you a made up example. Let's say the client kept thinking about the past just because it made them feel a little less lonely. Talking about why are we remembering the past, figuring out why you've spent 10 years just thinking about it is what we can also learn from. Because he was thinking about it, ruminating about it, because he felt lonely. So we can then spend the present working towards feeling less lonely. And because that's the future goal, to feel less lonely.
Many people believe that art heals people. What are your thoughts on the arts helping people heal themselves?
I think I implore a lot of it into my work. I love using creative, artistic lenses to do therapy with. I know I spoke on an earlier example of using a little bit of improv therapy, but very often, and especially one of the most common things is play therapy when you work with kids. And that's using a lot of their imagination and creativity, using little dolls to talk about family situations, using drawings because they can't express what they need to express with words. Sometimes they don't know how to. I use a lot of drawing in my work, which is funny because I'm an awful drawer. My 5-year-old clients can draw better than me, and it is sad. And that helps because then they laugh about everything. So I put a lot of drawing work into it. I use I use sometimes monologues. I use like acting, drama therapy when I feel someone is can't access a part of, like, can't access their emotions. It's kind of stuck in there. They don't feel comfortable expressing. I have them read a monologue from something and start to just have it not relate to them, right? Just something that talks about anger. And we might start to imagine, if they're angry at their father, imagining their father and the person they're angry about. And then starting maybe to write their own monologue, expressing it. And then maybe then it ends with writing a letter to their father. Different stages and steps. Sometimes you don't need all those steps. But art is so helpful to do a few things. One is it creates a little bit of distance. So we're able to see things a little bit better. The other thing is sometimes our words fail us. Talking about things can fail us. We don't always come up with the best words. We feel nervous on the spot. It gives us time to process it through a different lens, to tap into just some of the emotion. They don't have to feel like they have the right words. They could just put they could put whatever they want on the page. Especially when people feel a little bit more closed off talking about these things. There are also just people who already are doing art, and I like to throw that in. Like, let's make this some expression if we can. Let's use your art, whatever medium it is. It could be music. They make music. Let's use it. Let's write a song about your experience. Sometimes it helps with their art. Sometimes it's just something for us. It's just something that's helpful for us in a way we know how to use it. And it doesn't matter the population. I use this with everyone. It doesn't have to be just creative types to use creative therapies. Anyone can benefit from a creative therapy. And part of where I know to use creative therapies, I don't always start there. Sometimes it's where I get to. The more closed off, sometimes just on a personal note, and maybe there's more I can personally learn. I mean, there's always more I can personally learn. But the more difficult they are emotionally towards something, the more sensitive it is, the more sometimes removal, the space you might need between themselves and what they need to express. Sometimes it's just too painful because their sensitivity to that emotion, they're not used to feeling it. So their sensitivity is too high to have any, to really explore it in therapy at the moment.
What do you, when you kind of like look at your patients and you're, seeing what's happening in the process, I can imagine it's just like kind of like an eye opener for not only them, but for you. Do you mind going into a little bit of like when that aha moment happens and like what they see? Like, I'm so curious now because a lot of these people, as you said, there are some people that are not even artists that that art helps them heal. And you give them a creative. And then, I don't know, let's say they were painting a picture because they can't express their words, like you were saying, a 5-year-old can't. What happens? I'm so curious.
Again, for them, it depends. Sometimes it's something that's like, the common thing is some sense of relief and validation. Because now they understand a little bit more.
So they got the validation. Do they express that to you? Or do they just, how do you know that they have the validation, I guess?
There's so many different reactions. So sometimes it's they say, oh. Sometimes it's just, a little nodding and understanding, more subdued. Sometimes they're just like, yes, okay, great. It's all over the board. For me, personally, I feel my own self validated in my, we could all use some validation in our life. Can be important. It's so important to validate yourself. But, to quote, actually wearing an Avatar The Last Airbender shirt, but to quote Iroh, help from others. While it's most important to help ourselves, a little help from others along the way can be very beneficial. I'm very much paraphrasing and killing that quote. But I get that validation of like, I'm doing a good job.
Other people that actually, even though you could see that there was something happening, that they're still in denial after they've worked through that creative exercise or hesitation, I guess.
Yeah, there are people who are, everyone is at a different place in terms of their therapeutic treatment. Some people are so closed off to something, if they mention it once, let's say somebody is having difficulties with alcohol, right? Let's say they're drinking a little bit too much, but they always deny it. Let's say through a little bit of therapy work, one time in session, they say, I wish I could cut down on the drinking, and then goes into something else and it's not mentioned again for another session or two. I know they're still in a different place. Like, I know that they're a little bit more open now than where they were months ago or weeks, however long they're in treatment for. So everyone is going to be on a different journey and have their own pace to it. Just that's still a huge win. To get that little statement is still a huge win for them because they're now a little bit more open to it. And then in more time passing, however long that is, they're going to be a little bit more open to it. We're all on our different pathways, and progress is not a straight line. It has a lot of waves to it. The goal is just to keep kind of going up and keep trying to go up, but there will be waves. So the next week they might be completely, back to where they were. But then maybe it takes a little less time for them to mention that drinking again. And little small progress.
Or, I can imagine, they seem like they're in a better place and have essentially healed from whatever experience. But then they come in next week and they're like, this happened. I don't know what to do.
Here's what I'm going to say. They are not back at the beginning. They are not back. It might feel that way, but they are not. Because they already have all of this knowledge under themselves. So even if, let's say you lose the path for a second, right? Let's say you feel like you're back and you feel you're at the beginning. The way let's say someone has gone with it, again, I'll go back to the alcohol example, just because I think it's a very good clarity to it. Let's say someone hasn't drank for 6 months, and they go back on a binge and they feel like I'm back at square one. No, they're not. They had 6 months of experience on how to do it. And maybe next time it doesn't even last 6 months, it lasts 3. It could, because that happens. But they have knowledge there that they can tap back into. Or maybe the way that they found was helpful, but it wasn't fully helpful. There was something missing. We already did half of the work now. We found out that there's something there, or sometimes we find out what's not there. Right? Sometimes we find out that this was not as helpful as we thought. It was for a time, but it really was a little misleading. We could find out why that was misleading. That leads us to maybe the answers. The point is there's been work done, and you could learn so much from that work that's been done already.
To help propel into another new circumstance.
Exactly, a new golden age. Or we find out, again, I'll just go back to the drinking example. Someone's drinking because they feel, coping because they feel lonely. Let's say they call a friend every time, right? So eventually that stops working, right? Maybe they weren't fully feeling lonely. Or we don't know they're feeling lonely yet, but that's what was helpful. Maybe it's also romantically lonely. So at first it felt that they were just calling a friend because of their loneliness. But really, we found out it's more romantic loneliness. And unless we knew that experience before and how it was helpful, we might not make the jump to know that it is the romantic loneliness. So whatever coping skills that sometimes stop working for us, we knew they were useful for a time. So it's important to know why they were useful for a time and how they helped and maybe what root cause they're doing. Because when it comes to healing, there are very many different levels, and I could not go into all of them, to split into at least 2 levels. One is more of an immediate help. So little coping skills we can use to adjust our immediate behaviors and our immediate plans so we can kind of function. And then there's a little bit more of a deeper side. Where did these thought patterns come from? Why am I thinking like this? What is at the root of my problem? So coping skills can sometimes help us make sure we're doing well right now, but we also want to find the root of the problem to kind of fix it at its source. I'm using a little bit of, I'm making it a little bit reductive. So if there's anyone listening who is also a mental health professional, I'm making it reductive on purpose.
Thank you so much, Jason. I think this is going to help people relate to any sort of circumstances that they may be going through in their daily lives, and perhaps they'll be able to understand a more of a scientific level of things, and hopefully that helps. So one of the things that art does to us is it provides opportunities for growth, healing, inspiration, and love. It helps friendships develop. It provides friendly social atmospheres and gives people a purpose in their life. It does much more than that too. In fact, it could be said that a lot of people rely on their art to get through life, whether that be by getting through a rough day, week, month, or even year. The arts allow some people to give themselves another chance at life when life has not been kind to them and they feel like giving up. These individuals use the arts as a healing mechanism to cope and escape from their issues that are happening within their own lives. Could you name a time where you have struggled immensely, and how has your art helped heal and guide you to a brighter future?
I think one of the things I mentioned before is a little bit of the anxiety I go through. When I say a little bit, it's a little bit more than a little bit. And just for a second, again, might need a cut for time to explain what anxiety is. Our emotions come from what we're thinking. It's basically a telephone call we get from our body to tell us what we're thinking. We have an event. Event leads to an immediate thought we don't have control over, leads to an emotion that we don't have control over, leads to an action, which we do have control over. So all of our anxieties come from the thought behind anxiety is worry, things we're worried about. And that anxiety serves to motivate us to do something about it. And that anxiety serves to tell us, like, hey, you are worried about something. Like, listen. And so how theater has helped me with that is there are a lot of things that sometimes are out of our control. When we have anxieties, we can only do sometimes so much. I could make sure that I'm doing what I need, once things a week for my career, but I could still be worried I'm never going to make it. And there's a validity to that. I would be sad if I never made it as an actor. I think that could be a common sentiment. It allows me to express the things I don't have control over. It allows me to feel comfortable with these anxieties because I have a place to kind of let them out, let the world see. And it allows me to also forget about them for a second, forget about the things that I don't have control over. It's allowed me to have a place to put these.
When you say these?
Well, there's more than just anxiety. All the emotions sometimes. Sometimes we don't have control over the anger we feel. The thought behind anger is someone's doing something to you, right? And so we don't always have control of that. Sometimes it's a superior, right? Let's say it's a boss who, you don't like the way they're handling things. you can't really do anything. Or it's not, you don't want to make any waves at work. So like you could go through HR, you could do all this, but that's less beneficial for you at the end. Like you think about it, you decide it's less beneficial and there's nothing to do about it. The acceptance is really important in that. And that goes back to like fixing things at its root, accepting. But it still sucks. So being able to express that on stage is wonderful. And same things with sadness, same things with surprise, happiness, all of the emotions. It's a place that I can express all of these things I don't always have control over.
Have you ever received an email, text, phone call, or even a notification from someone who felt like you helped heal them at an instance where they were down on their luck and going through a tough time?
Yes. And it doesn't always happen immediately. There are countless times with friends, you talk to them, you help them, you work with them, and then all of a sudden, they might seem at first like they're not listening. Then all of a sudden, a couple days later. I'll make this related to my work as a therapist. As a therapist, you are helping people. You're always helping people. That is the job. There are some people who are responsive to your treatment. There are others who aren't. When it comes to getting thanked, it's a part I don't really think about. Because I mentioned this earlier, we don't know the effect we have. And sometimes we will never know. So if I get worried about the results, again, these things that are out of my control, I can get too bogged down without seeing results and stop focusing on the process, what I can control. So being able to help someone at work, I can only control, am I prepared? Am I learning when I need to learn? Am I researching when I need to research? Am I reflecting enough on some of the sessions to make sure that I did everything I could do in the moment or was expected of me to do? And if not, learning from that and taking that, I can only focus on, am I doing enough? And when it comes to specifically getting thanked, I can't focus on it. But I will say, sometimes the best work you can do is when someone thinks you haven't done something at all, and it was them. And that's so powerful. And it's not because they don't, and it's not because they don't think you are helpful as a therapist, but it's because they are, and rightfully so, I should say, rightfully so, they put in a lot of work during therapy, and I've just kind of given them a path for them to follow. And they have taken every step and challenge along the way. And they feel so beneficial in the way they change things that it's just like, I did such a great job for myself. And I'm like, yes, you did. You absolutely did. So sometimes the less people realize my effect, the better the treatment has ultimately been. And I stole a little bit of that from Futurama, the episode where Bender plays God. And there's something interesting from a good book. My pulmonologist actually recommended this book. It's called Atomic Habits. It's a book about building good habits, and I would highly recommend it. One of the things he talks about is that every NBA sports team, right? I'm going to use the NBA, I'm going to use the NBA. Every sports team at the end wants to win a championship, right? That's the goal of every season, ideally. Let's win a championship this year. So when you set an end goal like that, I'm going to get the audience to laugh, cry. Everyone has the same goal as you. If you are an actor on stage, yes, you would like that as well. So getting focused on that result is not beneficial because everyone is the same. Everyone in your position, for the most part, obviously small differences, but has a very similar goal for you as you do. So being able to focus on the habits that you build to get there and staying true to those habits, staying true to those decisions you make, putting the work in, putting the time in, creating a new way of going about it maybe that someone else hasn't thought of, a new type of method, a new whatever. That's the difference. Those habits, the work we put into it, that's the difference between achieving your goal. And you listen to almost every single athlete, every single performer, they say the same thing. There's a little bit of luck. They almost typically thank God, but they say it was the work. I did the work. I stayed true. I did it every day. I sacrificed this, that, the third, everything. It is the work they put in. It is the habits they build. I think there's a nice little term, which is perfect practice makes perfect. Because if you don't treat practice seriously, you could practice and not get much out of it. If you are not practicing in a efficient way, it's not going to turn out good. If your practice habits are poor, the ultimate result is still going to be poor, which is where reflecting and thinking of maybe new ways to practice, trying to make innovations with that, or just researching different ways of practicing to, you don't have to innovate, just what everyone else has done that's effective, and using a little bit of your own logical reasoning onto what practice methods are good and will lead to that. Because if you can practice better, you can perform better.
Very true. That's more insightful to think about it that way. Because if you do it perfect, and I always actually think about someone always said this to me, if you can do something 27 times perfect, you've made it a habit. And I think that's true because, obviously everybody wants to strive for success, and not everything is going to be successful. But at least if you tried, you could do it. This whole conversation, though, is not to say that we should always think that everything's going to be perfect or everything's going to be not so perfect, but there should be some sort of happy medium, and as long as you're doing your best.
I have a whole thing. My core personal belief and tenets involve balance. So I really like what you said there. And when it comes to perfection, we will never be perfect. You listening will never be perfect in anything. We can strive for it, though. And I think that's part of just being human. To err is to human. It's true. I mean, we are going to mess up. We are not going to be able to be perfect. But that strive for it is helpful. To a point. Again, everything with balance to a point. There's something called the law of diminishing returns, which is I'm just going to use an example. If you spend 10 hours practicing a day, how much benefit are you going to get from the 11th? How much are you going to get from the 12th? The first 2, 3, 4, 5 hours are going to be very helpful. Once we start to reach a point, the amount we're learning from it can come down. And it's up to each of us to find what that point is. Sometimes it's more.
Let's say you practice for a piano recital all week, and then you practice the morning of because you're still nervous that you're still going to mess it up or whatever. You start to kind of get the better of yourself, and the anxiety starts to kick in because you think that you're going to mess up. You start to think things. So too much of that repetitiveness will probably become a disadvantage for you at some point.
Because the immediate thought there, like I said, event, thought. The immediate thought is, I'm going to do terribly. Again, our emotions are tend to motivate us. It wants you that you got into that habit because it's what led you to go for 5 hours a day, right? That thought has motivated you to spend 5 hours a day or however many a day studying or practicing. We have to also then sometimes look at that cognitive distortion sometimes and say, this isn't true. Here's an alternative. 5 hours was where my comfort, is what I needed. The 6th and 7th, I don't need. Again, too focused on the result of doing well. When we focus on the process, I spent 5 hours. I'm proud of that. And that's where the action is then starting to adjust how we're thinking about it.
True. Okay. If you were to be able to go back in time, what would you tell your younger self when you were looking for healing through your art? Would you have said something that might have been helpful for your journey? And then what would you tell a future up-and-coming artist who is looking for a way to navigate the arts and to find healing simultaneously?
The short answer is everything. I wish I could just go back to myself younger and tell them everything I know, not have to go through the experiences and then just have that, knowledge. But sometimes we have to experience something to actually learn from it. I think I'd say the same thing that I want to do for myself now. Try to do a little bit every week for your craft. That's all you can ask. That will make you feel better about your art. Set a goal. Stick to it. At least on the art. And for any other artists listening, I know I've talked a lot about different ways to be helpful. But if you are struggling, mental health therapy. I promise you one thing. If you get a decent enough therapist, if there's any concerns you have about therapy, let them know from the start. They'll be able to work with you. Maybe you feel therapy is, just sitting and complaining and fetching all the time. It's not that. It's something completely different. They'll ask, what do you think would be helpful for you? Just sitting, okay. Well, maybe someone thinks, just sitting and actually working to make a plan and a thing for myself, you know what? Therapy could be us just sitting down at a specific time and making that schedule. Therapy, you are in control in the therapeutic room. You have complete control. You can dictate, to an extent. You can say what your concerns are about therapy, and the therapist will work with you. There are a lot of misconceptions about therapy. If you have a decent enough therapist in the room with you, you will be able to clear up some of those and make you feel comfortable about what therapy could be for you, because therapy is different for everybody. I do so many different things with each of my clients. On my intro, I said I meet my client where I'm at and can adjust to where they're at. And that means wherever you are, whatever help you think you might need, that's my goal with you. Let's achieve that together.
Jason, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us on An Artist's Way of Healing and for sharing your story with us. What's even more amazing about your story is not only did your art heal you, but you made your art your career and you are using your art to heal others every day. I can definitely say that you have impacted lives today in a positive way with your words, wisdom, and most importantly, the story you shared that led to your fulfilling journey as an artist. I hope people also get inspired to find their own journeys through their art. I can imagine that your journey is not over, nor will it ever be over, as we as artists are continuing to learn through our art every day. Through our art, we learn, grow, expand ourselves, and discover things within ourselves that we never knew existed. This is part of our healing. Our healing through our art keeps us going and thriving. It helps lead us to healthier and more fulfilling lives. Jason, I want to say on behalf of all other artists, thank you. Thank you for doing the hard work that a lot of people may be too frightened to do on their own. The work of helping others with feelings that people may be mentally, emotionally, and physically struggling with and need direction to find the light on. Your talents and gifts to this world, I assure you, do not go unnoticed. We need more people like you who can take the plunge into identifying what will help heal those who need it most. Incorporating your artistic background into your clinical profession is just the icing on the cake, and it is quite genius if you ask me. I guess that's the beauty of art. Art finds its way into everything and can be incorporated into anything. I look forward to continuing to hear all the amazing success stories that will be coming from your practice in your bright future. I especially look forward to hearing the stories of how your artistic approach to healing your patients will change those people's lives. I hope they make the connection that art is good for the heart, for the soul, and can be just right for anyone. Keep doing what you're doing, Jason, because you are saving people every day. With that said, thank you all again for tuning into An Artist's Way of Healing. I'll see you next time, friends.